Today we're going to take a brief devotional look at Psalm 114. It's the second of the 6 Hallel Psalms, and this psalm revisits both the beginning and the end of the Exodus experience of the people of Israel. Here it's called both Judah and Israel. And the psalmist has two events in mind, two events separated by 40 years, and yet which combined teach the same lesson about God. This psalm neatly divides into 4 sections, each of 2 verses. So let's just work our way through it. First of all, verses 1 to 2, the scene is set. As God leads his people out of slavery in Egypt and makes his people his holy habitation and dwelling. But more than that, God came to them to reign over them. And Israel became constituted as a theocratic nation, a nation whose ruler was God, and who reigned over them through the reign of human kings. Then verses 3 to 4, in just 2 verses, the whole Exodus and wilderness experience is summarized. From the Red Sea parting to allow the people to cross on dry land, to the parting of the Jordan, so that Joshua could lead the people into the promised land 40 years later. And between those 2 events, God made his presence powerfully known at Mount Sinai. Verse 4, when you read it, is quite gentle. And yet when you remember how terrifying it was for the people encamped at the foot of the mountain, you realize how far from gentle, how dramatic that situation was. And then verses 5 to 6, the question is asked of the natural elements. What could possibly explain these phenomena? This miraculous parting of the waters on 2 occasions, the earthquake and the fire at Sinai. And in 7 and 8, the only conceivable answer, of course, is that it was God himself who, by his very presence, made these things to happen. And if that wasn't enough, the psalmist throws in another supernatural work of God during that time. The 2 occasions when God made water to burst out of the rock to quench the thirst of the people. Friends, it's a short, simple psalm, but there are at least 3 clear lessons being taught us in this psalm. For this is much more than simply a record of things that took place. First of all, we are reminded of the providence of God. See, divine providence is the process by which God exercises his sovereignty in ordering and directing all things in creation, animate and inanimate, seen and unseen, good and evil, so that his purposes are fulfilled and he is glorified in all things. In our very materialistic and secular society, I think we have to admit that we don't instinctively recognize or acknowledge God's hand in what happens around us. But as Augustine expressed it, nothing happens unless the omnipotent wills it to happen. He either permits it to happen or he brings it about himself. We tend to look for some naturalistic explanation rather than look for God. Secondly, as well as the providence of God, this psalm reminds us of the protection of God for his people. Just as he has done so often in the past, God still comes to the aid of his people and will, when necessary, as in the past, literally move heaven and earth to accomplish his purposes among his people. So friend, no matter what obstacle you face before you, no matter what challenges you have, no matter what need you have, God is able. And thirdly, there's a solemn warning here. If the inanimate physical world trembles before the presence of God, verse 8, how much more should men and women who one day will have to give account to him for their lives? The Lord bless you and keep you. And next time we'll briefly look at Psalm 150.